Good evening. Oh, we're going to have a program on our last evening of the Melbourne class, and this is 1958. And I think we may assume that this little difficulty with our machines is right in accord with the lesson that we will have tonight. But first of all, let us answer these two questions. And the first is, all my life I have lived with a fear of some kind. And then it mentions different fears and how can I overcome this. Well, actually, there are psychological ways of overcoming it, but I don't know anything about them. And the spiritual way is to develop a faith that there is a God. Now, whether or not you believe it, all fear is atheism. It means a state of mind that has no God. You see, we can face any problem of life, regardless of how severe, and work along with it and succeed or fail. The amount of problems we have is unimportant, and ultimately whether we succeed or fail is unimportant, because we really have a million billion years in which to work out our salvation. It doesn't all have to be worked out here in one lifetime. If it did, all of these boys that we've sent out to be killed in the war, whether they just have a hopeless outlook, wouldn't they? Because before they ever had a chance to get started in life, we sent them out and mowed them down. But as you come into a spiritual vision, you discern the fact that it's relatively unimportant whether a child dies at birth or whether it dies at 18 or 20, or whether we live to be 50 or 60, and in some sad cases go on to 80, 90, or 100 and become doddering parasites on others. Death isn't a tragedy. Very often death is a release, and always death is progressive. At least always where there is not a definite shall we say backward state of consciousness, one that's living entirely in the negative, because it has to begin where it is and start up. But ordinarily speaking, death is not the end of life. Death is the beginning of life, of another life. And so it is that we can face any problems of existence, physical, mental, moral, financial, human relationships, and make up our mind that that's part of our demonstration, to work them out. And do it sometimes with a sense of elation when we win and a sense of dejection when we fail. But that is no excuse to face them with fear. The person who faces them with fear has no God. They are still in an atheistic state of consciousness. Because if you have a God, you know that regardless of what problems you have, you are working them out, and eventually you're going to come through. And at least you have the awareness that there is a something, a God, a principle, a Christ, which, even if at the moment is invisible, even if at the moment is not on the scene, you still have no fear, because you know in the back of your mind that eventually you're going to work through, because you're never alone. There is a God. And so it is when you recognize fear, recognize the fact that you are entertaining a belief of atheism, that there isn't a God, and then you'll meet it quickly. You'll overcome it because you laugh. You laugh at yourself for believing there is no God, because you are not an atheist. Whoever you are not an atheist. You wouldn't be in this room if you were an atheist. But you are allowing an atheistic belief to handle you and to try to convince you that there is no God. And that's where you have to have a little backbone and be willing to talk right up to your error, talk right up to your fear, and say, here, you're never going to convince me that there's not a God. You're never going to convince me that the sun, moon, and stars happened by accident. You're never going to convince me that apples come from apple trees and pineapples from pineapple bushes and peaches from peach trees just by accident. You're never going to convince me that there isn't a law governing that. You're never going to convince me that there isn't a law of tides that says they shall come in at this hour and go out at that hour, and for 1,000 years ahead they can chart it to the very second. Why? Because there's a principle, there's a law operating behind these oceans. And there couldn't be such a law if there weren't a God, because man has never solved the idea of time and tides. Man has never solved the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. Man can't govern any of those things. And if man can't govern them, there must be something that is. And so if you've only come far enough along the spiritual life to have grown away from orthodoxy, which would fool you into believing that there's a God of good and a God of evil, a God who rewards and a God who punishes, and a God whose favor you can gain and a God whose disfavor you can gain. If you've only come long enough to know that all Orthodox religion is a humbug and have started on the spiritual path, you've come far enough to know that there's a God, and that God is love, and God never punishes, and God never holds anybody in condemnation, and God never gives one person control over another person. God never gives anyone at any time or any circumstance a control over God's perfect likeness, which I am, which you are. Now, just as you sometimes have to have courage to talk back to your employer when you know that you're in the right, you have to talk back to members of your family and stand up to them when you know you're in the right. You have to stand up to your government when you know you're in the right. You can't afford ever to let your family, your community, your government, your church, or anybody else talk you down when you know you're in the right. The world wouldn't be half the trouble it is if people had the courage to talk up to their superiors, as it were. I mean superior in the sense of place or position. So it is. There is such a thing called fear. We fear to be dominated by a tyrant in Russia, We have had to fight what we thought was domination in the Kaiser, domination in Hitler. Now we're fighting domination in the leaders of Russia. And you're well aware enough of history to know that these that we now call commonwealths have had to do some very tough talking to the government in England in order to win their complete independence and status as commonwealth instead of colony or possession. Now you're a commonwealth, a common wealth, a wealth in common, partners with England, not colonies, not under England. You're a commonwealth, but you had to fight for it. Every single one of these commonwealth countries had to fight for their status of equality, and that's why you have a prime minister here now, and that's why you have a queen mother coming now, because you have won the status of equality and respect, and you've done it by standing right up and talking for it, not fearing because they had a navy that ruled the waves, not fearing because they were the mother country, but actually standing up and realizing your true identity as men and women of equality with all people. The colonies in the United States had to do it long, long years ago with England. The northern states had to do it with the southern states on the subject of slavery. We all had to get together and do it with the Kaiser. We all had to get together and do it with Hitler. Everyone has to stand up sooner or later and assert their true identity. You'll see that when I read these passages that I've mapped out tonight in the Bible. You'll know who you are, and you'll stand up to it. And then you will not permit yourself to be dominated, because in the last analysis you're not being dominated by a man or a woman or a country. You're merely dominated by the belief that you haven't got a God to hold you up and support you and carry you through everything. And so, spiritually, my answer is to everybody that has fear, talk back to it. Assert your true identity as equal with anybody, with everything. Only be sure you're in the right, and then do it. And understand this, that trials are nothing. Problems are nothing. We all have to face them. We don't only face them when we have a little understanding. The more understanding we get, the deeper the problems we have to face. Or have you forgotten that with all of Jesus' understanding he had to face the crucifix, Gethsemane? Have you forgotten the trials that Peter and John and Paul went through with their high understanding? Of course, they didn't go through those for themselves. They did it for us. Had they been willing to retire from the world and enjoy their God realization, they would have had no such problems. But they set themselves up against constituted authority for our sakes. They violated laws of the land, temporal laws. Wherever they went, they were in violation of the laws. They were in violation of the laws of the Hebrew church to begin with. They were all members of that, but they were in violation. And then they were in violation to Rome. They didn't care how many laws they broke. They were going to give us our spiritual freedom. And they broke laws and went to jail. They broke laws and were burned and were crucified upside down. That didn't bother them. What the problems were, they had no fear. They had problems, plenty of them, but they had no fear. Oh no, not fear. Because regardless of anything else, whatever problem we go through so that in the end we attain the realization of our divine sonship. Who cares if they go to war and get killed? Who cares if they go to war and get imprisoned? Who cares if they go to war and starve, if they have the feeling that they're doing it not for themselves, but for you, for the world? They don't have fear when they go out. They have problems, but they don't have fear. And so it is with us. You are going to have problems from now till the end of time. And the deeper your understanding, the greater the problems, because the very minute that you begin to have a little understanding, you're going to take the problems of your neighbors on your shoulder by starting out in healing work. You're going to take on the problems of a practice. Then you're going to take on the problems of the community and see if you can't spiritually save them from their own ignorance. And eventually you're going to take on the problems, as we are doing, of capital and labor and of international affairs. And to the world sense, you're even breaking its laws. You're breaking laws to world sense, because they don't want us doing spiritual work. They want us going around preaching more taxes and more bonds and more bombs. They don't like the idea that we preach spiritual means when they're trying to convince people that the only means is material means. And that brings us problems. Who cares about problems? But let's not fear. Above all things, face our problems, suffer them through, ask our friends to help us with them, but don't fear, because that's just accepting an atheistic belief that there's no God. And that's that. Now, would you please discuss I am cause? There's nothing that I can add to what I said last night about that. That I in the midst of you is God, and that's cause. It doesn't mean that a human being is the cause of anything. It means that at the center of your individual being there is something called I, and it is cause. It has another name, consciousness. Consciousness. You really are not a human being. You are consciousness. And depending on what state of consciousness you are, what elevation of consciousness you are, this determines what manner of life you're living. Whether you're living the life of a grubworm, whether you're living the life of a slave, whether you're living the life of a free man, whether you're living the life of a spiritual entity, that all depends what state of consciousness you are in. In one state of consciousness, you could very well be and may have been a slave, and just had everybody bossing over you. But as through grace a higher realization came, you asserted your dominion, and you became a free man or a free woman. Still human, but free. But as greater light came, and your consciousness changed, you all of a sudden realized, I'm not merely a free man or free woman, I'm a spiritual man or spiritual woman. I have God-given strength and God-given dominion and God-given freedom, and you are living on still a higher plane. If you keep on going, eventually you'll reach the place where Jesus was, when he said, thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. He hadn't always been at that state, you know. At one time he was just at the state of other Hebrew rabbis in the temple. But he grew and he grew and he grew until he realized, why, no, I'm not going to stand on that platform just reading out of a book. And then he came to the passage where he read from the book of Isaiah and said, now is this day fulfilled. I have been ordained to preach the gospel, to comfort the mourner, to heal the sick, and he stepped down from that platform and he went out into the world and became not a temple rabbi, but a world rabbi. And then later, all that passed from him, and he was no longer the rabbi, he was master. Master, they addressed him. Earlier, they addressed him as Rabboni, rabbi, but later, master. So it is. They address you once as housewife, and someday they address you as practitioner, and another time they're going to address you as teacher, and if you keep on ascending one day, they'll address you as master. Do you see that? It all depends on your state of consciousness. And if you have advanced this far to reach this point, it means you're already on the spiritual path. And that means that if you just don't get satisfied someday when you find yourself healthy and with enough supply and say, I've arrived, don't rest with that. Keep going. Keep going. And then one day you won't call yourself a housewife, and neither will anybody else. But they'll be thinking of you as their practitioner, and then someday as their teacher, and if you keep on going, there is no limit to where you can go, because there is no limit to consciousness until one day it stands in its fullness and says, I am God. But that's all a matter of development. Now we will go to some passages from Scripture, because I've given this lesson tonight the title of The Message of the Bible. And I would like you to see that message of the Bible, so that you'll know for all time how it is that regardless of the fact that there are 66 books written by Hebrews in all states and stages of consciousness, right up to the most enlightened of Christians, nevertheless, they all tell the same story. And that story is of that which is invisible. So that we do not think too highly of ourselves, and remember with humility that regardless of what we may be or how high we may come, it is only by the grace of God and through the presence and the power of God, for we of ourselves are nothing. We of ourselves, as men and women, male and female, we are nothing. But by the grace that flows through us, you'll see what we are. And this is the book of Jeremiah, the prophet. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests that were at Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, king of Judah. Did you notice this? To whom the word of the Lord came. There's the beginning of the secret of the message of the Bible. The word of the Lord must come in order to lift us out of the ranks of being nothing but ordinary men and women, the mass, the rabble. That's all we are of ourselves until the word of the Lord comes. And then something happens. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, and as I read this, will you try to reach back inside of yourself as if a voice inside of you was saying this to you? Then you'll catch the meaning of it. The word of the Lord now is speaking to you, and it is saying, Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Then said I, Ah, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child. But the Lord said unto me, Say not, I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I shall send thee, and whatsoever I command thee thou shalt speak. Be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee to deliver thee, saith the Lord. Then the Lord put forth his hand and touched my mouth. And the Lord said unto me, Behold, I have put my words in thy mouth. See, I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out, to pull down, and to destroy, to throw down, to build, and to plant. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. And now Philippians. For it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Do all things without murmurings and disputings, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and a perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. And this is Isaiah. See how all of these prophets had the vision, and it's all the same prophet. Whether it's Jeremiah, Paul that I just read in Philippians, Isaiah, it is always the same. It is God that worketh in you. It is I, the Lord, that put the word in your mouth. And here says Isaiah, Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth. And the isles shall wait for his law. Thus saith God the Lord, He that created the heavens and stretched them out, He that spread forth the earth, and that which cometh out of it, He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein, I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and will hold thine hand, and will keep thee, and give thee for a covenant of the people, for a light of the Gentiles. How can anyone fear who knows this Bible? to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things are come to pass. New things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth. Ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift up their voice. Let the inhabitants of the rock sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord, and declare his praise in the islands. The Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, roar. He shall prevail against his enemies. I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make waste mountains and hills, and dry up all their herbs, and I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up the pools, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them. But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Saviour. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and people for thy life. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. Even every one that is called by my name, for I have created him for my glory. Yea, I have formed him. Yea, I have made him. Bring forth the blind people that have eyes, and the deaf that have ears. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. Who among them can declare this, and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified, or let them hear and say, it is truth. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. I, even I, am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior. Yet now hear, O Jacob my servant, and Israel whom I have chosen. Thus saith the Lord that made thee, and formed thee from the womb, which will help thee. Fear not, O Jacob, my servant, and thou Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. For I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my Spirit upon thy seed, and blessing upon thine offspring. And they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the watercourse. The message of the Bible is that there is a God. This God formed thee, not only spiritually, actually physically. Before you were in the belly, before you were in the womb, before you came forth from the womb, God is your creator. If it weren't for that, we would have no right to expect perfect health through God. But it is the fact that as God created the heavens and the earth, so he created your bodies. And that's why it says that God will quicken your mortal bodies. Because God gave you your body, and your body is the temple of the living God. And so it is that yet in your flesh you will one day know God. You will know the harmony of God. And you will do all of this by realizing that I, in the very midst of thee, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, shall never leave thee, nor forsake thee. And so it is, when these trials come, the deep waters, you will not drown. The fire, the flames will not kindle upon you. If in going through the 40 years of the wilderness, if in going through the waters and the flames, you will always remember that God in the midst of thee formed thee, maintains thee and sustains thee, and by the grace of that God you are free. You are the image and likeness of spiritual freedom and completeness and perfection by the grace of God. You will learn to let the Lord speak to you within you. Not once do you talk back to God. Not once do you tell God what you want. Not once do you complain to God. Not once do you tell God that you fear. But always you turn in, acknowledging any problem of the moment, but realizing, whithersoever I go, I know that God goes. In the valley of the shadow of death, God goes with me. Through hell, God goes with me. And it is that that enables us to face our problems until they're not problems anymore. Until we realize that those are the opportunities that are given us to surmount in order that we may come to the realization of this God ever present, always available, infinite in power, love, and grace. And so it is one day when we are ordained to heal the sick and comfort the mourner, that we have to go through the world of infinite troubles. And sometimes it's wearisome. Often the Master had to go away to be by himself, sometimes 40 days, with the weariness that he took on from those who were drawing at him, pulling on him. But always he came back refreshed and ready to take up the burden again. Whose burden? Not his. He had achieved his spiritual freedom. He took on himself the burdens of the people who were being misled by their church. He took upon himself the burdens of those who were crushed by the weight of the Roman Empire. He sought to bring them their freedom, and some of the very ones he was trying to bless and free turned on him. It wasn't only Judas Iscariot. One man alone couldn't have done all that harm. It was those who were willing to cooperate with Judas and all the other Judases. Those who were willing to doubt. Those who were willing to misunderstand. Those who were willing to believe that he wanted to wear a crown for his own personal glory. Be assured of this, nobody will ever wear a crown serving mankind. More likely it'll be a cross. And if he gets a crown, it'll be in the worlds to come, not this. Those who take upon themselves the yoke of mankind, service to God through man, they need every ounce of God power, every ounce of support from those on the path. And never forget that you will one day be one of those who will hear the Lord speak in your ear and say, go this way, go that way. Go to my people. Go to the nations of the world. Carry this word of life. And you will do it. And you will have problems, but you won't have fear. You'll have problems. Sometimes the weight will be more than you can carry. But you won't have fear. You'll know why you're doing it. And you'll know that regardless of the earthly scene, there is a spiritual one. Never forget that. Every generation that has sent men out to war have had to remember that their children who bore the burden of death, injuries, insanities, at least had to look forward to wearing a crown of glory for their sacrifice. Not on earth, but in another world. So it is. You have burdens to bear, family burdens, community burdens, tax burdens. All right, bear them. If you have to cry a little about it, cry a little about it. But don't fear, for I am with thee, and I will not leave thee nor forsake thee. I will be with thee unto the end of the world. This is the message of the Bible. This is what the Bible is saying from Genesis to Revelation. There is something called I. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I knew thee before thou wast in the womb. The Lord knew thee, and he knew thee all the way through from the womb to the cemetery. Do not fear. Grumble and complain once in a while. It's good. It gets it out of your system. But do not fear. All fear is the belief that there is no God, that there is no purpose to a life on earth. And that is what you must learn. There is a purpose. There is a reason why you were formed in the womb. Don't ever think for a moment that it was an accident or that your parents were responsible for it. They weren't. They were only the instruments used by God to bring you forth into this world. Never think for a moment that your parents created you or that you have created any children. That too would be a form of atheism. You have never been parents of children. You have only been the instruments through which God delivered his children to earth. And not for your purpose and not for your glory. For his purpose and for his glory. And that is why as soon as we wake up to that, we begin to realize that we weren't created for the things that we think we were. There is a divine purpose in our being here, but we'll never discover it as long as we think we're just men and women created by our parents. No, then all we can ever hope to be is just some human children. But the moment you begin to understand, call no man on earth your father. There is one that is your father, the one in heaven. And the moment you begin to realize that, and to know that your parents were merely instruments used by God to get you here on earth, that you yourselves have only been instruments used by God to bring your children here on earth, you will commence to understand the meaning of a divine purpose and why it is that in 66 books there are hundreds of individuals who heard the voice of the Lord that made them prophets, saints, sages, seers, and saviors. Why, as bad a person as Saul of Tarsus, that persecutor and killer of Christians, even he could hear the voice of the Lord and become the great Christian disciple. Nobody can ever be so unworthy that they cannot be lifted up to the heights. How? By a recognition that there is a divine creator. From Genesis to Revelation, you read about the creator who created man in his image and likeness, who created the heavens and the stars and the suns and the moons and the oceans and the fish therein. And you realize that even the fish were created for a purpose. Even the birds were created for a purpose. Everything on the face of this globe was created for a purpose, a divine purpose. And then you'll see how we come into relationship with each other. Because now we do not treat each other as human beings. Now we look upon each other and say, just think. The same Father that created me for some divine purpose has created you for some divine purpose. Now you'll understand that we are a commonwealth. We are a common heritage, a joint heritage, a united heritage. We're not separate beings, nor is anybody over us except the Lord that formed us. You'll understand the meaning of that then. Yes, indeed, you will. And you will know then that regardless of your problems, you can bear them. And if you go down under them, it's all right too, as long as you do not yield to fear. Because in fear, you lose your God. God doesn't lose you, but temporarily you lose your God. And life's a pretty terrible thing to a person who loses their God. Life must be an awful thing, walking up and down this earth, just wondering when the next accident's going to come along, or the next germ, or the next something or other. It's an awful thing. And yet, when you have your God, you don't even care when the next bomb comes along. Because even that, Paul tells us that even that can't separate us from the love of God. Neither height nor depth, nor things to come, nor things that were. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. So why worry about problems? If you have received your copy of the February letter, you already know that the subject is problems aren't problems anymore. And they aren't when you have God. They're just these things that we meet as we come to them. Get over that hurdle and on to the next step, because we are divine beings with a divine message. And I'm trying tonight to point out to you what Jeremiah saw, what Paul saw, what Isaiah saw, what Jesus saw. We are divine beings with a purpose. God has spoken into our ear and given us a mission. This is really true of everybody on the face of the globe. But you notice that he spoke there about those who have ears but didn't hear, the deaf who have ears, the blind who have eyes. What good are they? None, for they do not know yet that there is something inside themselves capable of speaking to them, ordaining them, commissioning them as prophets, saints, and seers. And there have been female ones in the Bible too, as well as male. No, the message of the Bible is that you are nothing of yourselves. We are nothing. We are nothing except as the Lord speaks in our ear. We are nothing except as the Lord holds us by the hand. We are nothing. That's why it even says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. You can't even claim a possession. You can't even claim your bank account. You can't claim the cattle on 1,000 hills. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And all you have to do is release everything in that way. And then all of a sudden you hear it bounce back with, but son, all that I have is thine. You'll understand then how you have everything while having nothing. Just like you have your integrity, and yet you can't look at it. You can't see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, but you have it, and you have it in the fullness that you wish to claim. And so as you release your supply and say, why, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the heavens declare his glory, the earth showeth forth his handiwork. Well, you're acknowledging God in all your ways. And then you'll demonstrate what Jesus revealed in the 15th chapter of John, that keeping this word in the midst of you and living in the midst of this word, that you will bear fruit richly. It is your Father's will that you do this. He words it better than I do, so let's look up the original words. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered. And men gather them, and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. That's one of the finest passages in all this Bible. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. If we weren't fruitful, if we weren't successful, healthful, harmonious, God wouldn't be glorified. God couldn't be glorified turning out failures. God couldn't be glorified turning out dead mortals. God is glorified in the harmony of our being, just as God is glorified by the beautiful light and the stars and the sun and the moon. God is glorified by the fruitage on the trees. So God is glorified in the fruitage that we bear. We only show forth God's glory in the harmonies of our lives together. So it is. The message of the Bible is there is a God, that this God is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Whithersoever thou goest, this God will go. And that without this God, we are nothing. But in the conscious remembrance of God, we are fulfilling the purpose for which we were created. And that's something to remember, that each one of us was known before we were in the womb. We were known to God. We were ordained. We were made a prophet unto God before we were in the womb, to serve God's purpose in one way or another. And then every day we have to ask ourselves the question, am I showing forth God's glory? Is there something more I need to know and then learn to listen and listen and listen and listen until that Lord speaks to us like it spoke to every character in the Bible. The Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Joshua. The Lord spoke to Elijah, the still small voice. The Lord spoke to Elisha. The Lord spoke to Isaiah. The Lord spoke to Jesus, to John, to Paul. You see, it wasn't just one favorite that God had. The Bible is full of those favorites. God spoke to King Solomon. God spoke to David. As hard a man as David was in many ways, nevertheless, he was able at times to hear the voice of God, and certainly Solomon heard the voice of God. And the whole Bible is a testimony of the fact that men who were willing could hear the voice of God. Mary heard the voice of God. The mother of John the Baptist heard the voice of God. Esther, Queen Esther, heard the voice of God. Ruth heard the voice of God. Her mother-in-law heard the voice of God. Everyone who attunes themselves can hear the voice of God, and hearing the voice of God, you are the servant of the Most High. You are an instrument for His use. And without that, we are nothing. Nothing. Then, as we go out about our work, we are upheld. Sometimes with fainting footsteps, but we're upheld. To know the will of God, to hear the voice of God, means, above all things, developing the practice of having many periods of solitude every day, going into the inner sanctuary. Now, I know, of course, as well as you do, that the first argument that comes to you is, but I have no time. Others may have, but I haven't. And of course, that isn't you saying that at all. That's the devil using your tongue, and you're letting him. Because it has been discovered from the beginning of time that everybody on the face of the globe has 24 hours in every day. So there isn't anybody in the world that has more time than another. We all have the same length of time, 24 hours. It just depends what use do you wish to make of those 24 hours. You know, sometimes I think of my life like this. I wish you could see it this way. You'd enjoy it. I'm not out here where you think you're seeing me. I'm sitting way back up here looking out through my eyes. That's how I live practically all of the time, looking down and out through my eyes. And you'd be surprised in that detached sense what I see out there, and the funny things I see, and the funny things I hear. And not knowing that I have a sense of humor, you don't know how I chuckle sometimes inside.